Hey, welcome back my precious snowy owls. Today we've got a new series on the channel, one that's considered not just one of the best, but one of the most influential TV shows of all time. So naturally, I had to check it out. But the real question is, how good is the first season of Lost actually? Let's find out. The story. I'm not going to go too deep into the story itself. It's season 1. There are still a lot of things that aren't fully explained yet, and I don't want to misinterpret something or get ahead of the show by mistake. So just keeping it simple, there's a plane, the plane crashes, they end up on an island, and from there it becomes a survival story. People try to survive, some don't. And slowly it becomes clear that this isn't just a normal island. Strange things start happening, things that don't really make sense, and over time, more people show up, which only makes everything even more confusing. And that's pretty much the setup. Characters. As a quick introduction before getting into each of them, here's what we're working with. A doctor with daddy issues, a fugitive elf, Mr. Clean tweaking over fate, the king rat of the island, a former torturer, a superstitious lottery winner, a pacifist hitman, a master herbalist, a painter with anger issues, animal control, a junkie hobbit, and last but not least, Jaime and Cersei Lannister. As you can see, we are working with a pretty interesting bunch of individuals, so let's not waste any more time and get into it. Jack, played by Matthew Fox. So apart from the daddy issues and the hero complex, Jack is our main character. Lost doesn't really have a definite main character, but if we have to pinpoint one from the group, it's probably Jack. Before the crash, he was working as a spinal surgeon, which is exactly where the daddy issues and hero complex I mentioned earlier come from, as Jack isn't the only doctor in the family. His father is one as well, and at a very high position. Growing up under that kind of pressure, constantly trying to live up to someone like that, shapes Jack into someone who feels like he always has to prove himself. It builds that need for control, responsibility, and the idea that if something goes wrong, it's on him to fix it. At one point, his father makes a critical mistake during surgery while under the influence, which leads to a patient's death. Instead of taking responsibility, he expects Jack to cover for him. Jack hesitantly goes along with it at first, but ultimately, he can't live with the decision, knowing it isn't the right one, and later testifies about what really happened, exposing his father. That decision ends up destroying their relationship for a long time, but it also shows the kind of person Jack is, someone for whom doing the right thing is second nature, even if it costs him. And that mindset carries into everything he does next. Because of all of that, once he ends up on the island, he naturally takes on the role of the leader, not because he wants power, but because he sees saving people as the right thing to do. He knows that if something goes wrong, there's no undoing it. He's not a necromancer, so he takes it upon himself to be the one making the decisions, stepping up in crisis, and constantly putting himself in situations where he has to carry others. Basically, everybody wants him to be the leader until he makes a decision they don't like. At the same time, the need for control becomes his biggest weakness. Jack struggles with uncertainty, with things he can't explain, and especially with letting go. That's where his conflict with Wok comes in. Science versus fate. Over time, the island forces him to confront that. He can't fix everything, and he can't control everything. And by the end, Jack shifts from someone who needs to have all the answers to someone who's finally able to let go. Kate, played by Evangeline Lilly. Kate is basically built for survival, just not for staying in one place. Her most played song is probably Running by Adam Lampert, for obvious reasons. Even before the crash, Kate was already on the run, which tells you most of what you need to know about her. Her life is defined by running, avoiding capture, avoiding consequences, and never staying anywhere long enough for it to catch up to her. From what we see early on, she has a complicated past tied to her family, and whatever happened there is serious enough to put her on the run. Instead of facing it, she escapes it, and over time that becomes her default way of dealing with everything. Because of that, Kate grows into someone who relies primarily on herself. She's reasonable, she's resourceful, adaptable, and capable in high pressure situations, but she struggles to fully trust others, or let them see who she truly is. At the same time, her sense of right and wrong is flexible. Whether it's robbing a bank or the choices she makes under pressure, Kate tends to justify her actions as long as they serve a purpose. Even her rules come with conditions. No one gets hurt sounds like a principle, but in practice, it aligns perfectly with what she already wants. In the bank situation, for example, that rule conveniently exists alongside her goal of getting what she came for, and it shows. Because of that, once she ends up on the island, Kate naturally falls into the role of a survivor. Because she's used to handling things on her own, she knows that staying still means getting caught, so she keeps moving. And when she can't run physically, she does it emotionally, drifting between Jack and Sawyer, pulling away the moment things start to get too real. She helps where she can, steps in when needed, but she keeps parts of herself hidden. Even when she forms connections, there's always a distance, like she's already halfway out the door. At the same time, that independence becomes her biggest weakness. Kate struggles with trust, with honesty, and with letting people get close without eventually pulling away. And on an island where there's nowhere to run, that becomes a problem. John Locke, played by Terry O'Quinn. If Jack is about control, then Locke is about meaning. Even before the crash, Locke's life is defined by limitation. He's someone who's constantly told what he can do, by his circumstances, by his job, and by the people around him. He lives a life where he has very little control, very little purpose, and no real sense that he matters. He's used, overlooked, and taken advantage of, even by the people he should have been able to trust. And then the crash happens, just as he's about to change all of that. Locke regains the ability to walk, and to him, that's not just a miracle, it's a sign. Proof that this place is special, that it means something, and that somehow he's a part of it. From that moment on, Locke doesn't question it, he commits to it. So while others are trying to leave, Locke is trying to understand. Where Jack tries to fix things, Locke tries to interpret them. He doesn't need control, he needs meaning. And once he's on the island, that belief becomes the way he moves through everything. He follows signs, trusts the island, and acts on instinct. To everyone else, that sounds insane. To walk is the first time anything actually makes sense. He teaches others to survive, helps where he can, and becomes one of the most capable people on the island. But everything he does is guided by belief rather than certainty. At the same time, that belief becomes his greatest strength and biggest foe. Wok is so committed to the idea that the island has a purpose that he's willing to ignore doubt, ignore logic, and sometimes even ignore consequences. And the deeper he leans into that belief, the more it defines him. Because for the first time in his life, Wok doesn't just feel useful, he feels chosen. Sawyer, played by Josh Holloway. Sawyer survives by staying one step ahead of everyone else. Before the crash, he's a conman, someone who lies, manipulates, and takes advantage of people for a living. But for Sawyer, it's not just a job, it's a persona, something he built for himself, and something he hides behind. From what we see early on, his past is rooted in trauma. He grows up watching his family fall apart because of a conman, and instead of escaping that, he spends his whole life chasing one, only to become one himself. Because of that, Sawyer turns himself into someone who doesn't trust anyone, he assumes the worst, keeps people at a distance, and makes sure he's always in control of the situation. And over time, that turns into a pattern. He pushes people away before they get close, keeps things surface level, and avoids anything real, because the moment people get close, they get the chance to hurt you. So instead, he flips it. He makes himself the bad guy first, because if people already hate you, they can't get close enough to hurt you in a way that matters. And once he's on the island, that mindset only gets stronger. He hoards supplies, controls access to them, and treats everything like a transaction, always looking to get something out of it. He leans fully into the role of the bad guy, not because he has to, but because it's the only version of himself he knows how to be. But underneath all of that, there's something else going on. Sawyer doesn't just hate other people, he hates himself, and that's where his conflict with Jack comes in. Because Jack is everything Sawyer wants to be. Someone people respect, someone who does the right thing, someone who doesn't have to pretend. And instead of accepting that, Sawyer tries to tear it down. He pushes him, provokes him, and does everything he can to make him crack. Almost like he's trying to prove that Jack isn't actually better than him. Because if Jack isn't, then maybe Sawyer isn't as far gone as he thinks. But the problem is, he is. Or at least that's what he believes, and that's why he keeps playing the villain, because it's easier to be hated than to try and be something better and fail. Said, played by Naveen Andrews. Said can handle situations most people wouldn't even touch, and that's exactly the problem. Before the crash, he's a soldier, and more specifically, an interrogator. Someone trained to get information by any means necessary, and he's good at it. But that's also the problem, because from what we see early on, Said isn't proud of that part of his past. It's not just something he did, it's something he carries with him, and something he's actively trying to leave behind. Because of that, Said becomes someone extremely controlled. He thinks before he acts, reads people well, and approaches everything with precision. While others react emotionally, Said stays calm, focused, and deliberate. He doesn't lose control, because he knows exactly what happens when he does, and that's what makes his role on the island so complicated. When things go wrong, when information is needed, when someone has to step in, Said is often the only one who can do what needs to be done. But doing that means becoming someone he doesn't want to be anymore. And that's exactly why it affects him so much when he crosses that line. Because Said is genuinely a good person. He doesn't justify it, he doesn't ignore it. He feels it, every time. He sets boundaries for himself, draws lines he refuses to cross, and when he does cross them, it's never easy. Not because he enjoys it, but because he believes sometimes it's necessary, and that's what separates him from someone like Sawyer. Sawyer becomes the role he plays. Said fights it. Hurley, played by Jorge Garcia. Hurley is probably the closest thing we have to the viewer on the island. Not someone trained to survive, not a leader, not especially skilled, just a regular guy thrown into a situation way bigger than him. And because of that, he reacts the way most people watching the show would, while others seem to know what they're doing. Someone like Wok, or even Jack. Hurley doesn't. He questions things, gets overwhelmed, and doesn't pretend to understand what's going on. And that's what makes him different. Before the crash, his life already takes a strange turn. He wins the lottery using a set of numbers that seem to bring nothing but bad luck, and instead of seeing that as something positive, he questions it. Even when something good happens to him, he doesn't fully trust it, because to him, good things don't just happen for no reason. And when they do, it usually means something's wrong. And that mindset carries into the island. While others are trying to lead, survive, or find meaning, Hurley just reacts. He worries, he questions, he panics sometimes, but he also cares more than most people do. He shares food, looks out for others, and tries to keep things together in his own way. Not because he has to, but because that's just who he is. He's not the strongest, not the smartest, and definitely not the most capable, but he's the most relatable. Because while everyone else is trying to figure out the island, Hurley is reacting to it the same way the viewer is. Jin, played by Daniel Day Kim. Jin is probably one of the most misunderstood people on the island. At least at first, he comes across as aggressive, controlling, and hard to like. The way he treats Sun, the way he reacts to others, it makes it easy to see him as the problem. But that's not really the full picture. Before the crash, Jin comes from very little. Everything he becomes later is tied to trying to escape that, to prove himself, to build something, to be someone of value. And in doing that, he ends up in a world that slowly changes him. He works under Sun's father, gets put into things he doesn't fully control, and over time, that environment changes how he sees the world. He's surrounded by people who operate without empathy, where strength and control matter more than anything else, and that starts to to shape how he reacts. Not because that's who he is, but because that's what he believes he has to be, especially when it comes to protecting Sun. From his perspective, the world is full of people like the ones he's seen, people who take advantage, manipulate and destroy others. So he becomes someone who's constantly on edge, controlling and aggressive. Not out of cruelty, but out of protection. And that's the version of him we see at the start. But Diamond begins to change that. The world he knew, the rules, the people, the expectations, they're all gone. And for the first time, Jin is in a place where he doesn't have to see everyone as a threat. And that's where things start to change. Separated from everything that shaped him before, he slowly starts to open up. He connects with people, helps where he can, and begins to show a side of himself that was always there, just buried under everything else. You start to realize that Jin isn't a bad person. He's someone who was pushed into becoming one. And once that pressure is gone, what's left to him is someone loyal, capable, and willing to do the right thing. Sun, played by Yoon Jin Kim. Sun is someone who wants a different life, but doesn't fully understand the one she's part of. At the start, she comes across as quiet, reserved, and almost passive. She stays close to Jin, avoids conflict, and doesn't really assert herself, which makes it easy to underestimate her, but there's more going on beneath that. Before the crash, Sun grows up in a world of comfort and privilege, provided by her father, a life where everything is taken care of, but where the cost of that life isn't always visible, and that cost is Jin. Jin ends up working under her father, getting put into situations that slowly change who he is, and while Sun sees the effects of that, the anger, the distance, the control, she doesn't fully connect it to the system she's benefiting from. Because of that, Sun lives in a kind of disconnect. She wants a better version of Jin, but struggles to fully understand what made him the way he is in the first place. And that's where the conflict comes in. Because Sun isn't just trying to escape Jin, she's trying to escape the life that shaped him. And Diamond gives her that chance. Once they are removed from that environment, things start to shift. The structure that defined their relationship is gone, and for the first time, Sun begins to act on her own. She makes decisions independently, speaks up when she needs to, and starts to define herself outside of everything she was before. And in doing that, she begins to understand things more clearly, not just about herself, but about Jin. Because Sun isn't becoming someone new, she's finally seeing things for what they are. Michael, played by Harold Perrineau, or I believe that's how it's pronounced. Michael is trying to be a father, but something about it doesn't quite fit. Before the crash, his life doesn't go the way he planned. He loses his relationship, his future, and most importantly, his place in his son's life. By the time he reconnects with Walt, he's not stepping into the role of a father, he's trying to catch up to one, and that gap shows. Because of that, Michael becomes someone who's constantly trying to prove himself. He wants to be respected, to be listened to feel like he actually matters in Walt's life, but instead of letting that happen naturally, he forces it, and that's where things start to break down. On the island, Michael doesn't just want to protect Walt, he wants to control him. Every situation becomes about proving that he's in charge, that he knows what's best, even when he clearly doesn't, and the more he pushes, the worse it gets. He becomes impatient, reactive, and at times completely unreasonable, lashing out at the people around him, even when they're trying to help. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't know how to care the right way. He confuses control with responsibility, and authority with trust. And the worst part is, Walt sees all of it. Because in trying so hard to be a good father, Michael ends up showing exactly what not to be. Walt, played by Malcolm David Kelly. Walt is a kid who's been put into a life he didn't choose. Before the crash, he grows up without his father. By the time Michael comes back into his life, Walt already has his own world, his own habits, and his own sense of normal. So when Michael suddenly steps in and tries to act like a parent, it doesn't really land. There's a disconnect between them from the start, not because Walt is difficult, but because that bond was never built in the first place. And the island only makes that more obvious. While Michael is trying to take control, set rules, and prove himself, Walt doesn't really respond to it. He listens when he has to, pushes back when he can, and never fully buys into that authority, and that creates tension between them, because Michael is trying to force something, and Walt isn't ready to accept it. At the same time, Walt is just still a kid. He's thrown into a situation he doesn't understand, surrounded by danger, uncertainty, and people making decisions for him, and all he really wants is something stable to hold on to. But nothing about this situation is stable, so instead he adapts the only way he can. He observes, keeps to himself, and reacts to what's happening around him, without fully understanding it. And that's what makes him stand out, because while everyone else is trying to take control of the island, Walt is one of the few people who actually enjoy staying there. Charlie, played by Dominic Monaghan. With Charlie, it never truly feels like things are under control. Before the crash, he's a musician, part of a band that had its moments and then slowly fell apart. And somewhere along the way, so did he. By the time we meet him, addiction isn't just a part of his life. It's something that follows him everywhere. It affects how people see him, how he sees himself, and the role he ends up falling into. And even on the island, that doesn't go away. If anything, it becomes more obvious. He wants to be useful, to be someone people can rely on, to feel like he actually matters, but there's always something pulling him back. And that's where his struggle is. Because no matter where he is, or how much things change around him, he's still dealing with the same thing. He relapses, lies, makes mistakes, not because he doesn't care, but because it's not something you just leave behind. And what makes Charlie interesting is that he's aware of it. He knows how people see him, he knows what he's done, and he still tries to move forward anyway, even when he fails, even when people lose trust in him, even when he falls back into the same patterns. He doesn't stop. Claire, played by Emily de Raven. Yeah, I'm probably butchering that. Claire is someone who's completely unprepared for the situation she ends up in. Before the crash, she's already dealing with something overwhelming. Being pregnant, unsure about her future, and not really having a stable support system around her. And then everything gets worse. Instead of figuring things out in a normal environment, she's suddenly thrown onto an island where survival is the priority and nothing feels safe. And that changes everything. Because while others are focused on adapting, leading, or understanding what's happening, Claire's focus is much simpler. She's trying to protect her child, and that becomes the center of everything she does. She relies on the people around her, looks for stability wherever she can find it, and tries to hold on to some safety in a place that doesn't offer any. But at the same time, that vulnerability puts her in a difficult position, because she's not just dealing with the island, she's dealing with it while being completely exposed, and that makes her one of the most fragile, but also one of the most important people in the group, because Claire represents something none of the others really do, a future. In a place where survival is uncertain, where people are just trying to make it through the day, Claire is the one caring what comes next. Shannon and Boone, played by Maggie Grace and Ian Somerhalder. With these two, something just isn't right. From the start, it doesn't feel like a normal relationship. Boone is always there, helping, supporting, fixing things, and Shannon just lets him. She's used to being taken care of, spoiled in a way, only stepping in when it benefits her, and relying on Boone for everything else. And Boone plays right into that. Because for him, that's where his value comes from. If he's not needed, then what is he? So he keeps giving away, keeps trying, keeps putting himself in that position, and Shannon never really has the reason to change. And that dynamic carries on to the island. Boone throws himself into everything, trying to prove that he belongs, that he matters outside of her, while Shannon stays on the sidelines, exactly where she's always been. And then Boone is gone, and suddenly everything changes. Now there's anger, now there's emotion, now there's blame, and it all gets thrown at walk. But the thing is, she doesn't actually know what happened. She just suddenly realizes Boone is gone, and now it's a problem. Now she cares, now it matters. After spending all the time relying on him, using him, letting him carry everything, now it hits, and instead of dealing with that, she looks for someone to blame, because without Boone, there's nothing left to fall back on, no one to rely on, no one to carry things for her. She's on her own for the first time, and she can't handle it. World building. When it comes to world building, season 1 keeps things surprisingly limited. I mean, for now the island is just a regular tropical island, nothing too crazy. Well, maybe polar bears, but at least they aren't bulletproof. Then you start getting hints that something isn't right. There's something moving in the jungle, something powerful enough to take down trees. And every now and then you get glimpses of things that really don't make sense, but that's kind of the point. The show doesn't try to explain the island. It keeps it just out of reach. You see enough to know there's something bigger going on, but never enough to fully understand it. And most of the time, what you don't see is more important than what you do. That approach works really well for building tension. The unknown feels dangerous, unpredictable, and constantly present. But at the same time, it comes with a trade-off. For a show with this many episodes, you'd expect a bit more exploration, more variety, more understanding of the space they're in. Instead, a lot of it stays the same. Jungle, beach, and glimpses of things that are never fully revealed. And while that hide more than you show approach is effective, it can also feel like the world itself is being held back. So by the end of the season, it feels like a choice. Either the show is deliberately saving those answers for later, or it's focusing so much on the characters that the world takes a step back. Season 1 opinion plus rating. Positives. Character variety. The island brings together a really wide range of personalities. You've got people with completely different backgrounds, beliefs, and ways of handling situations. And that contrast is what makes the group so interesting. They don't just coexist, they clash. Their perspectives, decisions, and priorities are constantly at odds with each other. And that creates a dynamic that feels alive. And sometimes, that dynamic is even more interesting than the plot itself. Backstories. The backstories are one of the strongest parts of Season 1. What makes them work so well is how they're tied directly to what's happening on the island. They are not just there for context, they actively reflect the character situation in the present. You are learning who these people were by watching who they are becoming. Kate is constantly running in her past, and now she's forced to stay in one place. Wok couldn't follow his dreams before, and now he finally can. And that connection makes each episode feel purposeful. Instead of stopping the story, the backstories actually deepen it. That said, some of them do run a bit long at times, which can slow the pacing in certain episodes, but overall they're handled really well, and for the most part, they're genuinely enjoyable. The Raft. The Raft storyline is one of the strongest plotlines in the season. It brings out a lot from the characters, conflict, tension, and some really solid interactions. You've got moments like Jim being accused of burning it, the whole Sawyer and Kate situation, and the group dynamic starting to shift because of it. And all of that builds towards an ending that actually delivers. The final sequence is intense, memorable, and raises a lot of questions, which makes it a really effective setup for the next season. What being taken adds another layer to the mystery, especially with the idea that these people are targeting children for some reason. And unlike the Hatch, this actually feels like payoff. The Hatch gets all the attention, but doesn't really deliver anything new, while the Raft is built, finished, and leaves you with a clear new mystery. The people abducting children. Negatives. Pacing issues. This one is pretty straightforward. With 25 episodes, some pacing issues are almost unavoidable, and you feel that at certain points. Some episodes rely a bit too much on stretched out backstories and slower dialogue, which can drag things down, and it becomes especially noticeable towards the end. The Hurley segment in the final, for example, goes on for quite a while, and instead of adding to the tension, it actually interrupts it. At the point where the story is building momentum, that shift ends up slowing everything down. It feels like it's trying to ease the tension, but instead it breaks the immersion that had already been built. build. The Hutch. The whole Hutch arc is actually really interesting. It's mysterious, it builds tension, and it feels like something important, like it's going to lead somewhere big. But the problem is how it's used. By the end of the season, it's just a cliffhanger, and because of that, season 1 ends up missing something important, a defining moment. The kind of moment you look back on and instantly associate with the season, like how season 3 of Game of Thrones has the Red Wedding. That one moment you instantly associate with that season. Season 1 of Oz doesn't really have that. You've got the crash, the raft, the character arcs, but nothing that feels like the moment. And the Hutch could have been exactly that. It had all the build-up, all the mystery. It could have been the thing that defines the season and pushes the story forward. Instead, it's held back, and while that builds anticipation for what's next, it also makes the season feel more like setup than payoff. A rating. The thing is, with 25 episodes in a single season, you're bound to get some weaker ones. So I'm not just judging it episode by episode, I'm also taking that into account, because if season 1 had, let's say, 10 fewer episodes, the overall quality would probably feel a lot tighter, and some of the pacing issues just wouldn't be there. That said, I was leaning towards an 8.5 out of 10, but considering the scale of the season, and the fact that I can't wait to watch the next one, I'm rounding it up to a 9. Overall, it's safe to say that the first season of Lost was a really solid experience. Love you guys, I'll see you in the next one.